San Diego's Qualcomm becomes a takeover target for Broadcom. So what happens if Broadcom succeeds? The San Ysidro School District is one of the poorest in San Diego County. So why in the world did they pay their former superintendent so much money? SeaWorld's bottom line continues to suffer as attendance keeps sinking, and it looks like executives knew business would be bad. Many homeless chased away from downtown streets wind up camping along the San Diego River, creating new problems. I'm Mark Sauer. The KPBS Roundtable starts now. Welcome to our discussion of the week's top stories. I'm Mark Sauer, and joining me at the KPBS Roundtable today, Matt Hall, Editorial and Opinion Director at the San Diego Union Tribune. Hi, Matt.
Hey, Mark.
Good to have you back today. Reporter Leo Castaneda of iNewsSource. Hi, Leo.
Hey, happy to be here.
Good to have you here today. Lori Weisberg. She covers business and tourism for the Union Tribune. Hi, Lori.
Hi there.
And environment reporter Joshua Emerson Smith, also of the Union Tribune. Hi, Josh.
Good to be here.
Good to have you here today. Well, it was a stunner in the business world this week. Qualcomm is the target of a takeover by Broadcom Limited. The $100 billion plus proposal is the latest bold takeover move by Hock Tan, a Malaysian American with a Harvard MBA and mechanical engineering degrees from MIT. But the proposal faces intense scrutiny. Lori, it's a long way from being done on this deal here. Just give us the overview. What's the scope of it?
Well, it's a combination of a cash and stock deal, about $70 a share. Qualcomm, before this, was trading in the mid-50s a share. It's now up into the high 60s a share. This deal, if it were consummated, would be the biggest technology deal ever. You've got a market cap value of Qualcomm of about $100 billion, the same for Broadcom. So this would be a very big company, and obviously, as you mentioned, it would have a lot of scrutiny from regulators.
Not just in the United States,
right,
but
exactly.
Europe, China, all across the world.
That's the issue, yeah.
Well, let's talk about Qualcomm's history here. It's tied directly to San Diego, even bought the naming rights for the big stadium. Give us a thumbnail on the company, who founded it, and how it flourished here. Well,
it was founded, we mostly know, we're all familiar with Irwin Jacobs, but it was Irwin Jacobs and several others, including with engineering backgrounds. It was around in the mid 80s that it was founded, and it flourished mainly in subsequent years when it developed this chip semiconductor technology that powers our mobile devices, our cell phones.
And Matt, that's the core business, isn't it, Matt?
Yeah, it is. I mean, it's a semiconductor and a chip company. One of Qualcomm's big assets is its intellectual property, which I'm sure Broadcom is salivating over.
Mm-hmm. And that's, I mean, everybody who's got a smartphone basically has some of this technology in it.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, everyone knows Apple or Samsung, and Qualcomm is up there too. As Lori said, it was founded in 1985, and it's really become synonymous with San Diego, right? In 1984, I think San Diego County had 9 Fortune 500 companies, but in recent years, we've only had 2. Qualcomm and Sempra. So losing Qualcomm or having Qualcomm morph into something else, get kind of taken into something else, is really going to change the fabric of the county, right? I mean, as you pointed out, there's a stadium. That $18 million that Qualcomm spent for that 20-year naming rights to the stadium, pretty good investment. A lot of people know it around the country because of that, but they've also been a super successful company.
We do have a brief clip here. Kelly Cunningham, economist, senior fellow at National University's Institute for Policy Research. Let's hear that.
They pay pretty well. It's well over $100,000 for the average employee at Qualcomm. And so that has a huge spillover effect because they do go out to restaurants and stores and they spend their money. And so other businesses depend on that.
That's got to be one of the best paying companies then. I mean, other 6-figure average salaries around in San Diego we know of?
It's a big part of the local economy. There's 13,000 workers there. And a couple years ago when they were talking about laying off about 1,300, there was a study that showed the impact of that loss of those 1,300 employees would be greater than the Chargers leaving town. And now here we are, the Chargers are out of town.
Yeah.
And so we hope that Qualcomm doesn't change too much, but it's one to watch for sure.
Well, Lori,
and there's life science companies too here that pay well, other biotechnology companies. But as he said, 13,000 employees, that's a lot of people.
Now, Qualcomm's been in the news lately, drawing the ire of Apple. They got some legal battles on that. Briefly, what's the beef there?
So Apple pays royalties or a licensing fee for this technology, and they basically say that Qualcomm is gouging them, that they're being charged for innovations that all the innovations that Qualcomm is not necessarily responsible for. So they've stopped paying Qualcomm for those fees.
Okay. Let's, Lori, I wanted to ask you about Qualcomm and the Jacobs family. Matt was touching on that a moment ago, and what they've meant to San Diego in terms of philanthropy. I should note here that the company and the Jacobs family are current and longtime supporters of KPBS. It's been a big push into the community.
Yeah, both Qualcomm and Jacobs and his family, both of them have contributed a lot. I mean, the symphony, $100 million to the symphony. There's the School of Engineering at UCSD that has his name on it. Then Qualcomm itself and its foundations and institutes have contributed, I think it's about $53 million just to UCSD. And then their employees, there was a study a few years ago, their employees alone just on their own, probably because of a matching program, about 20 million just of the employees. So it's very philanthropic.
And Matt, what do we know about Hock Tan, the potential new owner here? Would he come here, be part of the community, and do this sort of philanthropy?
I mean, TBD. Until about a week ago, Broadcom was based in Singapore. It still is based in Singapore, but Hock Tan famously stood with Donald Trump and said, we're going to relocate our international headquarters to the U.S. He said at that news conference that he would spend the company would spend a lot of money on R&D, engineering, manufacturing, that it would lead to more jobs. How then we get to his purchase of Qualcomm and what that means locally is a big question. But you can't, as Lori just said, think of San Diego without thinking of Irwin Jacobs.
Well, all right, that's a lot of questions to go and a lot more to this story as we move into weeks and months ahead as this deal progresses. We'll check in on that, I'm sure. Well, if you were to guess which school district's superintendents were among the highest paid in California, it's unlikely that San Ysidro would come to mind. The small district on the border is among the state's poorest and nearly went bankrupt just a couple of years ago. But Leo, your story has some shocking details about the pay package for the former superintendent. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so he worked a little more than 2 years.
And tell us who we're talking about here.
So we're talking about Julio Fonseca,
Okay.
who was the district's full-time superintendent. They've gone through about a handful of interims in the last few years, and he ended up working about 2 years at the district, 26 months, came out with a little more than $1 million, and that includes a $376,000 separation package when he abruptly resigned in September, plus $200,000+ a year salary, $100,000 in life insurance benefits that he was able to cash out. So it was a cushy job for a while.
And how does that pay package compare with San Diego Unified's Cindy Martin, the superintendent there, which is, of course, a much, much bigger district?
Right, yeah, it's a 22, I think, times bigger district. She made about $350,000. He was making on average about, if you average out all those payouts, about $450,000, $460,000. So it blows her out of the water in a much, much tinier district.
And give us a little sense of this district. How many students and the poverty level is high among these families?
It's a relatively small district, about 4,800 students, most of them Hispanic. About 80% are on free and reduced lunch. Recently, they actually tried to declare an emergency because about a third of their students are homeless. So this is a student where the student population is experiencing a lot of financial difficulties.
Okay. And San Ysidro, as we noted in the open, was almost bankrupt and in financial hole. They're still struggling, are they not?
Yeah, that's right. They were kind of staring into the abyss with a state takeover in 2014, 2015. They crawled their way back, and they seem to be on pretty solid footing, kind of working their way back. Recently, not just this, but they announced that they had $1 million shortfall the last fiscal year. They're projecting another $900,000 plus shortfall. So things are not looking so good, especially for a district that seemed to be finding its footing finally after so much trouble.
And just the numbers you're talking about there certainly would reflect on this whole package that went to Fonseca.
Absolutely. I mean, obviously, any money that goes to the superintendent's money, that's not going to supplies or facilities or whatever it may be. But I think it makes it especially jarring if you have someone who's being paid this, as well as anyone in the state, if not better, at a district that is not necessarily outperforming everyone or is not that size.
Now, how has the school board there responded to all of this, and his package has come to light, his compensation package?
They've been, there's a lot that they have hinted at that they can't say because of legal constraints and things that they think will be coming out in the coming months. They recently hired a new interim superintendent, someone they brought in from the Los Angeles area to kind of help stabilize, someone to be a steady hand. But I think they're just right now pleading for understanding. They've actually, at the meeting last night, said that some of the board members have even started receiving threats to them, to their own safety. So I think the situation is bubbling.
Lori?
But in one of your stories, it was at least one or two of the board members were almost blaming others for this happening, like they weren't taking responsibility, that they were misled. But how could they make that claim? I mean, how could they not know what they were approving? I was surprised by that.
I think, I think what they're trying to say, or what they believe, is that, they were presented with these packages and they were told one thing, and then the superintendent, and that's one of the problems that these districts have, they meet once a month. It's a part-time board, and they're giving a packet that's 400, 500 pages long 3 days before, and said, don't worry about it, here, I'll explain it to you. And so they maybe feel like they should have gotten more information, or that the information that they got was wrong. But at the end of the day, I talked to David Alvarez, who represents us here, and he said the buck stops with the school board. If they didn't understand it, they should have not approved it, or they should have asked for more time.
Josh, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, but did the superintendent write all this, or was there staff that was like on his side, or what? Paint the picture here a little.
Yeah, the superintendent was working very closely with his deputy, who then became his interim, both of which have since resigned.
I see.
So okay. It was kind of it seems like the top of the administration. The interim was a deputy who was running the business, so he was, helping write all these contracts and present the financial picture.
And that's a real lot of quick math.
Yeah, well, it's interesting you mentioned David Alvarez. There's a broader
City council
story
member
to
in
this.
San Diego, of course.
David Alvarez is a council member who represents that district. One of his staff members is running to replace him when he's termed out. Another candidate in that race is Antonio Martinez, who is on the San Ysidro School Board. And so this issue isn't just localized to that school board and its effect on the school board. It will become, I think, an issue in that campaign going forward.
And we got some legal issues too. There's been calls for an investigation by the district attorney. The county superintendent of schools has said the state should look into it. A lawsuit by Corey Briggs, the public advocate attorney.
That's right. So
a lot of stuff going on there.
Yeah, the first one, so the board members have asked the district attorney to take a look. They were sending some documents, and then last night we got word that the County Office of Education is calling for what's very appropriately called an extraordinary audit. We think it's the first time in San Diego County history. So we'll see. It's not going to stop for the next few months.
Yeah, so a lot to play out and all that. Just a last question on this topic. The response from the community. Are people really up in arms with these stories?
I think people are very upset. I think they're worried about what's going on. I think so much stuff has been happening so quickly that I think people are just trying to get their heads around what was really going on. Were these people, really trying to rip off the district? Mm-hmm. Is this some internal politics that's going on? So I think there's a lot of concern that this is going to trickle down and affect students, which is, what we all care about.
See what happens as the investigations and suits move forward. All right, we're going to move on. The hepatitis A outbreak among San Diego's homeless triggered a, wait a minute, I'm sorry. We're going to move on to the story on SeaWorld today. I'm sorry. So, Lori, you had a front page story today. It showed SeaWorld's officials reeling over the impact of the Blackfish documentary. Of course, we've had these problems with the aquatic park. Attendance is lagging. They're talking about a marketing and an advertising campaign. But tell us about the latest news here and some of the emails that have come to pass.
Yeah, and these disclosures of these emails just came a few days after their earnings, which were not good. Mm-hmm. So there's a lawsuit it's trying to become a class action lawsuit of investors who felt that SeaWorld was not upfront about the impact of Blackfish, this anti-captivity documentary that aired on CNN, and they weren't upfront about the true impact on the attendance and revenues, and they claimed that SeaWorld didn't disclose the real impact until long after they really knew about it. So, in connection with that lawsuit, they got the judge to unseal some of these internal emails.
And what do they show?
And so it shows this growing frustration among the executives and staff about cancellations. Willie Nelson, Bare Naked Ladies, also the catering events, cancellations, all seemingly tied to Blackfish. At one point, the former chief spokesman for SeaWorld in an email said, oh God, we really look like idiots. So it just showed their frustration. And then it showed that there's a subject line in some of the emails talking about lost blackfish revenues. And they were trying to tally that. And that was before, several months before they finally, in an earnings call, acknowledged there was some backlash.
Now, briefly remind us about Blackfish, if folks aren't really up on the details of that. This was a documentary that had devastating impact.
Yeah, and it had devastating impact in part because it was aired repeatedly on CNN. But it focused on one whale, a Tilikum, that was at the Orlando park, but that was also responsible for the death of a trainer there. But it was trying to highlight what they said is the mistreatment of these whales that should never be held in captivity. And so it has had an impact on attendance, and it also led the current CEO to end all captive breeding of orcas. It got rid of the Shamu shows and has a more educational presentation of the orcas. It's still kind of a show, but so it's made changes, but it's also they can't seem to regain their attendance. It just is not working, and they keep trying different marketing attempts to highlight SeaWorld's, the rescues, its ocean conservation efforts.
And let's talk about that a little bit. They put some more money into that, a new renewed push and advertising money and all.
Right. They're calling it Park to Planet, and it's aired in San Diego, and then they're going to take it national next year.
This ad campaign.
Yeah, this ad campaign, and they acknowledge that they should never have stopped doing this advertising campaign. And they claim in this most recent earnings call that it's resonating with people. But they are, like I said, they're struggling. Now, there are going to be some new attractions next year in San Diego and Orlando that they think will help. There's going to be this electric eel coaster, supposed to be the highest coaster in San Diego. So they're hoping that they can get that kind of crowd back with that thrill-seeking.
You know what's so interesting
Joshua?
to me is I can't remember the last time a documentary became such a piece of popular culture like that, right? Everyone knows what it is, comedians make jokes about it. I mean, it must just be an insurmountable thing for them to try to come back from that.
Yeah, they should have the filmmaker come back and do a story on the coaster now here. The impact was amazing.
No, when early on, a lot of people say that they took the wrong strategy. When that movie was just coming out, they wrote a letter to critics trying to get them to understand what was wrong with it. That everybody says that maybe that was not the right approach, and now they're trying this less heavy-handed kind of approach. But every time they think the blackfish effect is gone, it pops back up. Yeah.
Now, we touched on this, but the investors are not happy with all of this stuff coming out and how this has played out over the years since that documentary, right?
And that is that lawsuit. And then coinciding with that lawsuit, there's a federal investigation. We don't know a lot about what it's about, but it seems to be very much similar to the claims that were they forthcoming to their shareholders, investors about the effect of this. And so they've kind of intervened in this lawsuit to a degree, but they are also in the midst of an investigation.
And what's the status of that now? How long will that take?
We don't know. And when there's an investigation, the feds will never tell you
Right.
anything about it, or so I keep looking to see what's happening with the case. I think it's about to get class action certification. The judge issued a tentative ruling this week, so maybe that'll give it more legs. The lawsuit itself, I don't know what impact that'll have on the investigation.
Okay. Well, it's again another institution in San Diego. We mentioned Qualcomm at the outset, and it's troubled here. And we'll see what happens, and more of your reporting as we go forward. What happens with that lawsuit? Well, now the hepatitis A outbreak among San Diego's homeless triggered a crackdown of tents and campers on downtown streets. That's apparently resulted in a big influx of homeless encampments along the San Diego River. And Joshua, your story talks about the kind of whack-a-mole effect here and what the officials are trying to do. What is the situation? Kind of set that scene for us along the river.
Along the river? Well, let's. I think it's just a general kind of context, which is that the city's approach has been to say we got to clean these areas, right? We got to go downtown, 17th Street, 16th Street, in front of Father Joe's Village. We've got to move people out of there, kind of clean what we see as maybe potentially ground zero for the hepatitis A outbreak. And then those efforts were then extended to parts of the San Diego River around Qualcomm Stadium. However,
the same idea behind that, clean things up.
Yeah, like you got to move on if you're here, not indefinitely, because actually legally they can't do that. But they can say you got to move while we clean this, and they issue these cleanup and abatement notices 72 hours in advance of going into an area and taking out debris and cleaning up stuff. And so they focused on the Qualcomm area and the river right around that section. But they're homeless folks all the way from, the beach to Santee, right? And one of the major groups, the San Diego River Park Foundation, that's been working for years to try to improve conditions on the river, does a count of encampments every year. And they found that in October, there was something more than 100 encampments when in years past, going back about a decade, they usually find something like 40, 50, 60 encampments. So that was kind of surprising that they found so many.
Basically doubled that number
Yeah.
along that river. Now, you talk to some of the folks and they say, okay, you're going to move me out, I got 72 hours, and they tell the cop who's there,
Yeah.
where am I going to go?
Yeah, yeah. And we talked to one guy, and he said he talked to a law enforcement officer who told him, out of sight, out of mind. That's the thing. Stay out of our way, basically.
And not a real solution.
Not a real solution. I mean, that was kind of the interesting thing as we were hearing from, I've been talking to homeless folks now for several months, and we just keep hearing over and over again, they're moving us around, they're shuffling us around, but where do I go? What's the long-term solution?
And Matt, we've seen a couple of city council members here have at least made a suggestion tell us about that. With the Chargers out of town, there's rooms open up.
Yeah, I mean, as Josh pointed out, the number of encampments went from 61 to 116. There's a ton of people there along this river. So David Alvarez and Lori Zaff in particular has been really fighting to keep the San Diego River clean and to try to clear out some of the situation, have proposed using the Chargers practice facility, the former Chargers practice facility, which is just sitting there vacant. It's part of the Soccer City proposal, so it would be a temporary solution, but their suggestion is there are showers there are restrooms there's plenty of space outside the building, right? It's clearly a business space, not a residential
Tell us
space.
exactly where that is.
It's on Murphy Canyon Road,
Okay.
pretty close to the stadium itself.
But kind of lacking public transportation, even the stadium has the trolley.
The mayor's office says one of the reasons they're not looking at this right away is because security would be costly, transportation, getting people back and forth would be a problem. But we just editorialized in favor of the idea because, you know what, there are homeless people there. So what, then you need to take them farther to get to the downtown and the 3 tents that are proposing to build in the next few weeks? It's a complex issue.
Lori?
I was just wondering, because I know you talked to some of them.
Yes.
Did they any of them mention whether they were going to try to go to, or had they tried to go to some of the temporary tent facilities that the city started, including one, in Golden Hill?
The one in Golden Hill, as I understand, has been very popular with women and especially those with children. A lot of folks I talk to don't want to go to the shelters. Actually, they want their kind of like freedom. I mean, there's definitely a number of different mindsets out there. In terms of how, but I think once you set these facilities up, they fill up pretty quickly.
Right.
It's not like as if there's a lack of demand for them. I mean, the best practice that you hear from advocates around the country is the housing first model, trying to build housing that's affordable for homeless folks. Like Father Joe's just recently said that they're floating an idea to build some low-income housing downtown, and of course that frustrated some of the folks down there.
Yeah, right.
So it's a sticky situation.
Right, Leo?
It seems like every time we come up with a potential building like the motel near Imperial Beach or the old library, it gets shut down immediately. So it doesn't seem like, there's a lot of ideas, but I don't think it doesn't seem like any of them are.
Yeah, they were advocating, Alvarez was advocating for the old library. There was questions about whether or not it needed to be rehabilitated and whether it was the right site for it. If you check the lobbying disclosure reports, the Downtown Partnership was lobbying heavily against that. It's a tough one. How do you help folks who can't afford the rising rents in San Diego? One thing that was interesting was, I've been talking to a lot of these folks, and like I said, there's a lot of different types of people out there. There's no shortage of people who recently became homeless, or at least from my anecdotal experience.
Even though the economy is going good, the unemployment is supposedly very low.
Yeah, I regularly run into people who said, I lost my job 2 years ago, I held on for a year and a half, and I've been homeless, for the last 3 months.
A little less than a minute left here. The foundation members, the River Foundation
Yes.
members, are they hopeful they'll find a solution to all this and all those trails along the river they want to expand and put in?
You know, hopeful might be a strong word. I mean, they're working pretty diligently. I was surprised at how much effort they go in twice a week, you know, to document where stuff is, then to go in and clean up. They want a system of trails, you know, all the way along the river, which, you know, obviously, who wouldn't want that, right? But it seems like they get one area cleaned up, then they got to move on to the next one, and the area they just cleaned up, so, you know, a little bit of a whack-a-mole, like you said.
Well, we talk about this issue a lot, and I'm sure we will and continue the good reporting because it's just a very vital issue in our community. Well, that does wrap up another week of stories at the KPBS Roundtable. I'd like to thank my guests, Matt Hall of the San Diego Union Tribune, Leo Castaneda of iNewsSource,
Thanks for having me.
Lori Weisberg of the Union Tribune, and Joshua Emerson Smith, also of the Union Tribune. A reminder, all the stories we discussed today are available on our website, kpbs.org, and wherever you get your podcasts. And on a sad note, I must close today. Pat Finn, our wonderful producer of the Roundtable, leaves us today. Thanks to Pat for getting our show on the road in such fine fashion and for being such a good friend and teacher all these years. And thank you for joining us today on the Roundtable.